Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. And today's reaction is going to be to The Magical Mystery Tour. So, if you've been following the progress on this channel, I've been trying to go through all of the Beatles studio albums. And chronologically, I skipped a pretty big one, Sgt. Pepper's, but that's only because one of my older videos, I did a comparison between Sgt. Pepper's and a record that the Rolling Stones released at the same time, Her Satanic Majesty's Requests, and it's basically the same as one of these videos, except I'm just comparing a less well-known Rolling Stones album to perhaps the most famous Beatles album. But what's interesting is I think this might possibly be, and I'll have to, revisit Abbey Road when I get to it, the strongest Beatles album. But it's not really in that conversation. It's not upheld as much as Sgt. Pepper's or Abbey Road. Now, it may be because Abbey Road, of course, has the iconic album art, and Sgt. Pepper's has invented the idea of album art, perhaps. And on top of that, Magical Mystery Tour was originally released as a soundtrack EP. So today when you think of artists releasing EPs, you think of people who maybe haven't written enough songs or don't have enough resources to do a full album, so they release a short album. But at the time, an EP, it was literally just a marketing thing. The record companies want to get material out as soon as possible. You'd get the singles, you'd compile enough to put out an EP, and then you could compile, then eventually you'd get to release a full album. So EPs weren't notable as releases. They were just this weird between the single and the full album. And on top of that, this was a soundtrack EP, so I guess people didn't think of it as an album. But at the end of the day, it was songs written all around the same time in the Beatles' career. A lot of interesting songs with a lot of vision in them, and they're connected. For me, it's just as coherent as any album. And then what eventually happened is they extended the Magical Mystery Tour double EP into a full LP, a full album, by adding songs that they had previously released as singles from that time period and weren't from any other album. So I guess this one maybe doesn't make people's rankings just because it's not a true album, but what really is a true album? Prior to the Beatles, albums really were just compilations of singles. And even in the early days of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, albums would be released differently in the UK and in America and sometimes in other places like Canada and Australia and I guess other countries. So, it's not like there's any purer EP than the Magical Mystery Tour. And this one has some either good songs on it and, some truly great songs on it. So let's get to those. So track number one, this is one I had not heard at all before actually listening to this album in full. It's called The Magical Mystery Tour. I guess I put this one in the same category as the title song for Sgt. Pepper's, in that I don't really think of it as a standalone Beatles song that anyone just would play for its own sake, but it's just sort of written as the anthem for the album, or in the case of Magical Mystery Tour, the whole special. That said, a lot of people like Sgt. Pepper's as a song, and I thought Magical Mystery Tour was also a pretty great song in its own right. If anything, because it's not recreating that marching band sound, it's more beautiful to listen to than the Sgt. Pepper's song, and it just has this whimsical singing to it, the Beatles buying into their Lewis Carroll aesthetic. The Magical Mystery Tour is coming to take you away. It also does this thing that I noticed more on the earlier Beatles songs, where the instrumentation is just completely different at the end of the song than during the rest of it. So it's actually quite a cool composition, even if it doesn't quite hold up as a standalone thing. The next track on the album is one I'd heard a bit before, but not enough to really remember. And that's because it's kind of a weird tune, but it's also not a weird John tune or a weird George tune where you sort of expect that. You expect that psychedelia or you expect that spiritualism. This is a weird Paul tune, and it was influenced by his time with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, this Indian spiritualist who influenced a lot of the Beatles. So it's about this idea of someone seeming like a fool to the outside world, but if you take the time to listen to him and go find him in his isolated place, he might actually have some interesting things to say. Paul does play some slightly unusual instruments on this, both a recorder and a penny whistle, so overall it's a not exactly conventional melody, it's not exactly conventional instrumentation, but it's not quite weird enough to call it psychedelic, so it's sort of in between weird Beatles and vaudeville commercial Paul. It's a very unique song. Now, track 3 is an instrumental, which, some bands will do a bit more of. It's not uncommon to have 1 or 2 instrumentals on lots of classic albums, but it's not something the Beatles do very often. And at the beginning of this track, the guitar is very muted, so it doesn't feel like a Beatles thing at all. It feels like something that might be on a Cream album, like just a bluesy jamming kind of thing. You're just appreciating the plucking of the guitar strings in its rawest form. But then it gets more Beatleish, more psychedelic. You get some mellotron coming in, and then you get this thing called a wordless vocal, and it's the Beatles all just humming syllables together. And Ringo's voice seems to be the most pronounced on this one. And I suppose Ringo maybe has the most neutral voice. It's smooth, it's nothing fancy, but it's just nice and deep, so it doesn't come at you with the whimsy or rawness of a John or a George or even a Paul. So it doesn't interrupt the instrumental feel, even as there's technically some singing on it. Track 4, you get to what, if you don't count Flying, would be the weirdest track on the album. It's called Blue Jay Way. It's Ian MacDonald, one of the guys who wrote on the Beatles, described it as George Harrison's farewell to psychedelia, because as George Harrison was finding a more coherent religion through his relationship with Hinduism, he could, leave behind the drug-based, secular, hard-to-describe religion, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, of psychedelia. This song is supposedly based on a real walk that Harrison had while disoriented, while coming off of a plane flight. And so if you know that, you can appreciate those lyrics and try and imagine you're in the situation described in Blue Jay Way. But it's just, a kind of weird song to listen to, but it has enough words to it that it doesn't throw you off too much. Track number 5 is called Your Mother Should Know. This song kind of has a similar vibe to When I'm 64, though there's some organs in it that give it a slight Beatley psychedelic feel. McCartney saw this as his plea for generational understanding. I guess the idea that, you don't just like whatever music is cool in your own day, you might want to listen to your parents' own taste in music. And it's clear that Paul was the one who just most wanted to play, old-timey, accessible show tunes that people of any generation could like. He wasn't just into writing the weird stuff that the other Beatles were increasingly embracing. Now, track number 6, this is a candidate for my favorite Beatles song. It's called I Am The Walrus. And I think what I like about it so much is it's this ideal blend between psychedelia and pop. So the lyrics are weird, the chord pattern is slightly weird, but there's also singing throughout. It's very easy to pick up on what the melody is. So it is a pop song. It doesn't sound like very many pop songs. Now, it's a bit disappointing in hindsight that the lyrics are supposedly mostly just John saying nonsense as a way of teasing the critics who wanted to find deeper meaning in Beatles lyrics. It's a sentiment you can understand, but if you love the song, maybe you want it to have some very specific, profound meaning. That said, it's really hard to write pure nonsense, and any nonsense reference is going to be chosen for a reason. So there's this reference to Semolina Pilcher, and Pilcher was the name of this drug enforcement officer who was giving the Beatles and Stones a hard time. So it's cool historically that there's a sort of rebuff against Pilcher in the song. And more broadly, the imagery of I Am the Walrus from The Walrus and the Carpenter poem. It's a reference to Lewis Carroll, and Lewis Carroll, I think, is just a great reference for the Beatles to grab onto, a great influence if you're trying to make psychedelic music, because Lewis Carroll's writing was considered literary, but it was still writing for children. It was weird, but not too weird that you can't understand it, which is great if you're an act like the Beatles and trying to do something innovative, but you want it to be something you can understand. And just to connect this to my other videos, this is why, you don't need absolutely simple pop music, but that doesn't mean the only alternative is to make like the weirdest Pink Floyd stuff where all you're doing is long guitar solos and you're alienating a lot of potential listeners. You can be accessible and popular and still very creative and weird. And I guess this is why the Beatles are considered so widely the greatest band of all time, because they managed to do that. They managed to experiment with never really alienating anyone. So the next track on the album is called Hello Goodbye, and this was actually an A-side, and I Am the Walrus was a B-side. And the way the charts worked, the Magical Mystery Tour was on the charts, and the Hello Goodbye I'm the Walrus single were on the charts. And so this means that I Am the Walrus technically counted as being both number 1 and number 2 on the chart at the same time, even though it wasn't I Am the Walrus as a standalone song. It was I Am the Walrus as the B-side to Hello Goodbye, and I Am the Walrus as part of this EP. Now, supposedly there was some disagreement between John and Paul, because John thought, well, I Am the Walrus is a far more interesting song than Hello Goodbye, so I Am the Walrus should really be the A-side. But Paul eventually won out that saying that Hello Goodbye had more commercial potential. Now, Hello Goodbye, yes, if you just look at it on paper, it's a very simple song, and John's probably objectively right. It's not as interesting as I Am the Walrus. But when you listen to it, you don't think you're listening to an experiment, a bland pop song. It really sounds like few other things, and I think it's just because they're so economical with the instrumentation. So if you watch the music video, you'll notice there's some parts where Ringo is staying very still, and then there's some parts even where George is staying very still, and it's because they're just waiting for the perfect time to make their little guitar run or to do their bit of percussion. So every time an instrument comes into this song, it really makes its mark. And this is Paul's singing at its most olive oil quality. I've previously talked about the idea that John was described as lemon juice and Paul as olive oil. It's just so beautiful and smooth and flowing. Point is, Hello Goodbye has a very distinct sound, and even if I like I'm the Walrus a little better, this isn't a competition. Two great songs, two very different songs, shows the minds of John and the minds of Paul. Now, back to more contrast between John and Paul, because for tracks 8 and 9, we get the contrast between Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. So these are both songs that speak nostalgically about places in Liverpool. As with Strawberry Fields being a park behind a Salvation Army branch that John used to beg his Aunt Mimi to take him to go hang out in when he was younger. But whereas Paul is just sort of happy to be more directly nostalgic in Penny Lane, I think John wants to try and do something more profound. So let's take a look at this lyric. No one, I think, is in my tree. I mean, it must be high or low. That is, you can't know, tune in, but it's all right. That is, I think it's not too bad. So strictly as a lyric, it's kind of awkward, bad isn't the most poetic word, so lots of simple words, doesn't quite make sense. Who he's talking about is changing in each line. So the first line he's talking about someone in the tree, but when he's saying it must be high or low, it's like he's randomly switching to talking about the tree rather than the person and the tree. So it's a mess, but I think John is trying to capture the fact that he's not nostalgic for the literal strawberry fields, he's nostalgic for that feeling he had as a child, for that sense of atmosphere it recreates. And by just literally describing strawberry fields to someone, as Paul goes on to do with Penny Lane, you're not going to capture that. He's trying to capture the magic, the teleportational property he must feel when he walks in there, going back as an adult. So track 9, Penny Lane. This is about a street in a suburb of Liverpool. I don't really know Liverpool geography, so I don't know if it's suburb in the sense I'm familiar with of quite far away, or whether it's basically part of Liverpool City. What's interesting is that while there's a huge contrast between the very psychedelic Strawberry Fields and the more show-tuney Penny Lane, there's not an absolute split in who John and Paul, whereas people, I said before in talking about Gotta Get You Into My Life at the end of Revolver, you might think of John as the druggy Beatle and Paul as the innocent Beatle, but people have certainly heard LSD influences in this one too. There's a line that goes, and though she feels she's in a play, she is anyway. So that is kind of a surreal line, Paul saying, life is a play, but it's such a cliche at this point, the idea that you're feeling so happy that you feel like you're the star of a show. It's more subtle. It doesn't have to be a drug line, but it very well could be. And again, the banker never wears a mac in the pouring rain, very strange. Again, could just be a description of an idiosyncratic person, but also could be a weird drug vision of this person who just stands out in the rain, not wearing their rain jacket. But the point is, it's just a very joyful, innocent song, great trumpets, but if you want to look into some of the details, including the line about finger pies, which I know from John Lennon's biography as a double entendre to it, yeah, it's the song is one thing on the surface and something only, slightly different below the surface. Track 10 is called Baby You're a Rich Man. This is, on the one hand, quite a weird song, but it's too poppy for you to be overwhelmed by the weirdness. I just thought about the line of "Baby, you're a rich man," whether it could possibly have any gay connotations to it, because I think of baby as something you call someone romantically, and then they're singing to a man, but nothing I saw directly suggested that, so I think they're just playing with slightly unconventional lyrics here, and this song, it was also just a sort of mix and match thing, kind of like Day in the Life, though Day in the Life, because it's so dramatic in its meaning, it feels like something ambitious, whereas this just feels like a slightly awkward pop tune, but it's awkward in a rich way. So it brings together a singable chorus with some soft-spoken, with a soft-spoken falsetto intro that kind of mildly reminds me of the Bee Gees. There's a lyric that goes, "How does it feel to be one of the beautiful people now that you know who you are, what you want to be, and have you traveled very far for his eyes to see?" So beautiful people was supposedly code word for hippies, or not really code word, it was a term that was used at the time. So it's a song that's expressing some discomfort of, are we counterculture, or are we just rich people? Are we the kind of people who complain about our taxes and taxman, or are we the kind of people who say, if there's going to be a revolution, count me in? I think the Beatles felt some genuine ambiguity about that. So there's a lot to unpack in this song, even as it's one of the less notable ones on this record. Finally, track 11 brings us to another classic, All You Need Is Love. This one was written for a TV special, so it was meant to be very plain language, something that people around the world could get behind, sort of politics without the alienating part of politics. Almost a proto We Are the World, except because it's specific to the voice of this band and it's not these lyrics thrown at a million artists, it sounds more genuine, or when it sounds corny, it's corny in a good, fun, Beatle-y, sing it at the end of Yellow Submarine way. I don't cringe when I hear this one the way I cringe when I hear We Are the World. It's a genuine joy of a song to hear, and it uses that great riff from La Marseillaise at the beginning, and they also do this thing near the end where they sample the early Beatles song, She Loves You, Yeah, 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 as if to say, look, on the one hand, we've come so far with all of our studio innovation, but on the other hand, is All You Need Is Love really that different a song from She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah? So a lot I enjoyed here. If you take out the insert in this record, which it's too big for the jewel case, but lots of cool stuff to see inside here. They have these little comics which tells the story of the actual Magical Mystery Tour TV special. Now, this TV special got very poor reviews upon release, and it wasn't available for people to buy for a long time. Now I believe you can get it. I haven't seen it. I'm from these comic strips, I'm not convinced it would be that entertaining. It's something that tries to be weird, but it's not actually so weird that the mere weirdness can make it good. But, never know. Sometimes things are poorly reviewed, and I like them. I had a good time with Yellow Submarine, the movie, and that didn't feel like it had so radically different a script from this one. So you'll have to see whether you like the stories of Ringo's Aunt Jessie, and the bus driver Jolly Jimmy Johnson, and the hostess Wendy Winters. Anyway, forgive me for my bad Beatles accent. Anyway, look forward to listening to the White Album next. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.